Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Hillary Dickman. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Admission for Marketing and Communications at Colorado College, and I'm also a parent of 2 college students.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at Canaan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. This week in the news, Haley and I return to our conversation about college fairs with a few more additional tips. I have part 2 of my interview with Nate Haveman, the VP of Enrollment at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and we're talking about Hope College, of course. Kevin Newton will continue sharing some changes that are coming in the world of international admissions.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hey, Hillary.
Hey, Mark. How are you?
Good. Got really good response from the conversation about college fairs from quite a few listeners.
Excellent.
And so I just had a follow-up question. So, you know how you made the point, I'm rarely going to remember you. So pressure off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what about the times when you are all alone and nobody's coming by your table and somebody has the 5 to 7 minute conversation with you? Do you feel that's a little different, that you may remember them, or maybe when...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it depends on who you're talking to, right? If you are talking to my dean, Karen Kristoff, I feel like she never forgets a name of a student. Her brain is a steel trap. She will remember
Good for
that
her.
Conversation. Oh, it's amazing.
Sheesh,
And
Karen,
so
shout out.
I'm so envious. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, she'll remember. And when she reads your application, she'll remember. Most people don't have that kind of memory. I will remember that I had a great conversation from someone from whatever school at X. Like, I'll remember where I was. I'll remember when it was. I'll remember the name of the school, and I'll be able to figure it out eventually. And it's sort of embarrassing. I'll have to go back through like our events and slate and figure it out. And I've done that before because there have been students who I've thought, oh my gosh, who was that student that I talked to? I want to make sure that I make a note in their file if I had a really great conversation with them, because I know that I won't remember. But I don't know. I'm pretty new to this job, right? I've been doing this for 4 years, and that's happened like 3 times in 4 years. So I think it depends on who you're talking to, how distracted they are, and how just naturally good they are, or maybe it's part of like being a really hard worker, remembering names, because we have to have that. And sometimes I will make a note on the back of a student's like card, the information card that they fill out. Sometimes I'll make a note on there so that when I'm entering the information into their record, that the student, attended the college fair, I can have some notes in there if there's something specific I want to remember about the student. But it doesn't happen that doesn't even happen once per college fair, right? It's pretty rare.
Sure. Do you also do something similar when you're speaking at a school to a group of 4 or 6 people? And
for sure. Occasionally I will write it down on the card that the student fills out, that there was something specific that we talked about that I wanted to make a note of. And sometimes it's not so much about an individual student, but about the conversation that we had generally. Like, I have found, I remember a very specific visit to Cambridge Ringe and Latin School that I had 2 years ago. Great public school in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I sat there and had the most fascinating conversation with those 6 students. And I think only like 4 of those students who were at that visit ended up applying. But I remember that they were part of that conversation that I had with them. And so that certainly, it wasn't like an individual thing. It was just like, wow, these 4 students who were all at that visit. They're all amazing because we had such a great conversation. And that speaks to the kinds of conversations that you have in class here at Colorado College. And I want students to be able to function in those environments. And so it can help when you have a really good group conversation too, not just individuals.
Yeah, everything you said there is my experience, both on two sides, both traveling and admissions, doing fairs, doing info sessions, but then also on the counselor side, school counselor side, when schools do info sessions. This happened back at Westtown when I would sub for Susan on these in the South Room, as well as at KIP when I was like the point person for visits. And admission officers would sometimes stay behind and say, "Tell me more about that kid with the New York Jets, sweater on." And so I don't want people to feel nervous. I don't want people to feel some high stakes game. I don't want people to feel like my decision is hinging on the impression that I make. But I also don't want people to be naive that there can be it's the whole thing. You have one shot at a first impression, and there can be an opportunity to make a favorable impression. And I'm differentiating between the college fair where it's a long line and you have 60 seconds and then you see 40 people. Like that's totally different from these more 5 to 10 minute type of conversations that you might have at a fair if nobody's around at your table, or at a school visit and it's a small group. And I do want people to see it as an opportunity, but not just to, I try to tell people, think first, what are the things you don't know that you need to know more about in order to know if you want to move forward? I want them to think that way. And I think by doing that, they tend to make the best impression. But I just wanted to bring a bit of balance.
Also, it's just important to remember that the person you're talking to, the rep, is a human. And so you treat them in a conversation the way that you would treat anyone else. You ask them questions both about their area of expertise and about themselves and their engagement with their area of expertise, rather than trying to make it I think what you don't want to do is to make it feel forced, or like I'm trying to control this conversation to get to the thing that I really want to tell the person. Like that is really uncomfortable. And so I think it's hard if a student hasn't had, practice having conversations or isn't comfortable having a natural conversation. It feels like a lot of pressure to tell them this could matter, right? And so I just don't want students to feel that way, that like they have to have some kind of great conversation. If it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it's not going to hurt you.
Sure.
But it can be really helpful for us to have, and it certainly makes our job a lot more fun. It makes schools more memorable and individuals more memorable when we're able to have a conversation. But part of that is like practicing that in your daily life. And so for parents, like teaching your student how to have great conversations. So before you walk into the orthodontist's office, saying like, "Hey, what kind of questions are you going to ask the orthodontist?" Or "What kind of questions are you going to ask to the hygienist in the dentist's office?" Just so that they feel cared about and they feel recognized and like they're able to share information about what they're doing with you in a way that makes sense. I think those are those are skills that we have to practice with our kids, because not everyone is a natural like Dale Carnegie, right? These are things that you have to learn over time. And we as admission officers are great people to practice that on, but like don't feel like it's a make it or break it situation when you have a conversation with us.
And I thought of another don't, and I'm quite confident you'll agree with me on this, but my question for you is going to be how often you encounter this. And so we talked about don't go up and stuff a resume and somebody, we talked about that, right? Mm-hmm. But there's the verbal version of that. Mm-hmm. The verbal version of, I just got student body president. I, trying so much to impress that you're touting your extracurricular accomplishments. Like that doesn't make the best impression. And my question for you is, how often do you find that happens where the person is they're trying so hard to impress you and they're really making it about themselves and wanting you to know what they've done, sort of assuming you'll remember all that stuff and assuming that they're making a great impression, letting you know that they just got elected for this position and they got this and they got captain of the team or whatever. How I'm sure you would agree with me that's a don't.
Yeah, for sure. It probably only happens to me once a year at
Mm-hmm.
fairs. I get it more through emails after students have applied when they're trying to kind of update what's in their file. It happens once in a while at fairs. And I don't know, like, I think I've said this before on the podcast that
Mm-hmm.
Colorado College attracts an interesting bunch of students who are pretty
Mm-hmm.
laid back. And like, that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that makes them want to come to CC.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that my experience is different from someone who's a rep at a different kind of school, a school that is more competitive in nature, or where students really feel like they have to constantly show how great they are in order to be admitted. I mean, our students are great students, but they're the kind of students who would like to spend the afternoon in a hammock rather than in a lab, although they're also in labs, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
So I I hesitate to generalize my experience
Mm-hmm.
across sort of admission as a whole because I do think that there's something about the personality of each college that sort of shapes the way that students interact with us. So I don't get a lot of that, but I'm sure that it's different from rep to rep.
Yeah, and school to school. Like if Rebecca Sapke, she talks about that a lot in her
Yeah.
college admissions book at Dartmouth.
Yep.
You know what I
Yep.
mean? People
Hmm.
constantly coming up and trying to, or chasing you down and
Yep.
parents and students letting them
Yep.
know, you know.
I was going to say, I feel like it's more likely to get that from parents than it is from students, because students are a little more shy about showing off than
Hmm.
parents. Like we want to show how awesome our kids are, right? So it's
Hmm.
understandable.
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't happen to me that often.
So I want to switch to a completely different question. So one of the questions I am constantly asked, it's usually by parents, and it's usually spring of the junior year.
Hmm.
It's my student doesn't have any service hours
Hmm.
on or it's more broader than that. It's some sense of a deficiency in the resume.
Hmm.
Service hours is a very common one, but another one is I don't think they've done that much. They've got this and that. They got to get some things on their resume,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, can you talk a little bit about how that moves the needle or doesn't move the
Hmm.
needle when it comes to how decisions are actually made? Because I feel
Yeah.
like there's a real misperception out there that adding something you haven't been involved in at the end of junior year is gonna tip you in.
Yeah. First, I want to talk specifically about service. So, something like 72% of CC students engage in service within our community while they're here at CC. And I don't look at their application to see if there's service because I want to create that kind of community. That kind of community happens naturally. So
Hmm.
it's not something that we're specifically looking for. So to first talk about the service part, I don't care if you apply and you don't have any service on your application. Like we value service. We think once you get here, you will engage with it because it's something that our campus cares about, and there will be people around you who are going to drag you out to go do a creek cleanup or to work in a classroom as a tutor or whatever. Same way that we assume there are going to be students here who are going to drag you out on a camping trip, and you might decide you hate camping, and that's fine, but you're going to get out there and do it once. So that's we think by bringing you into this community that both you will shape the community and the community will shape you in great ways. And so because of that, what I want to see on your activities list is something that you care about doing. And so like on the one hand, yes, adding something at the end of your junior year, doing it over the summer before you start in senior year, that's probably not going to make an impact on whether you're admitted or not because it's one part of a much bigger picture. But if there's an opportunity to do something that you're really excited about doing, you should do it. I'm not going to knock you for having
Sure.
something that is a 6-month involvement or a 4-month involvement. As a 17-year-old, I want you to be getting out there and trying new things because I hope that you haven't figured out the whole world. Like there are very few Doogie Housers among us, right? Like you have a lot of experiences still to have, and I want you to have those experiences. So Like there are some students who are going to come to us who found that they really love some activity that they're doing outside of class, and they're going to do it for all 4 years of high school, and that's awesome. And then there are also students who are going to be kind of jumping around and trying different things, and that's great too. What I would say to a parent who says, like, I don't know, I think that their resume feels sort of light, like they're not doing enough things. Maybe they aren't doing enough things, and maybe your student is spending too much time playing video games or scrolling social media, and they really do need to get out and do something. So get a job, go do something, and then learn from that and grow from that. Or maybe the problem is that your student is doing things, but you don't think that those are things that we care about. And I would say to that there are no things that we don't care about. We care about what the student cares about. And so the ways that they're spending, that Bible verse that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Is that it?
Matthew. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that is sort of how we look at it, right? Like there, where you're spending your time is what you care about. And if you can relate that in your application to how you've grown and how you've become the person that you are, then that justifies the way that you're spending your time, as long as you're doing something. If you're not doing anything, you should get out and do something.
Sure. Yeah. No, well said. I think, in the minds of students and parents, test scores and extracurriculars, I'm not talking about really distinctive extracurriculars. There's strong evidence of passion. It's consistent throughout the file, and there's evidence of authenticity, but just sort of generic, I don't want to say generic,
tacking something on.
Yeah, or even just things that are so common, like you're a member of an NHS or something like that. There's a perception that that's tipping people in, and there's just so much more that goes into decisions, and that's rarely what tips people in, right? Like I think there's things like obviously institutional priorities, but just personal qualities. I feel,
and those we learn from everything that goes into your file. It's not just one thing, right? It's the whole picture put together. It's like taking a whole bunch of puzzle pieces and putting them all together, and you can finally see what the puzzle is supposed to look like. That's what gets you in. And so if you're missing a lot of pieces and we can't figure out what the puzzle is supposed to look like, then then you're in a bad way, right? But that could be because you're not doing stuff outside of class, or it could be because you're not helping us to understand how those things have helped you to grow into the person who you are.
Well said.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, for part 2 of my interview with Nate Haveman, Nate and I talk about why college costs so much these days. Nate goes back to Hope Forward, and he goes into more in depth explaining things like how are students selected for Hope Forward, is it based on merit or need, and what does the interview process look like. Nate talks about how unique it is for a liberal arts school to offer both business and engineering like Hope provides. Nate talks about the role research plays at Hope. Nate talks about the study abroad opportunities at Hope. Listen and enjoy. So, what is the reason, in your opinion, that higher ed costs have gone up at the rate in which they have, like you said, doubled since you were a student? What explains that?
Yeah, I mean, I think at Hope, I can talk about Hope probably better than I can talk about other schools. If I look at the Hope of 1998 to 2002 when I was a student, the Hope that we're recruiting students to now is candidly far better. I mean, it's a far stronger place to be a graduate of than even when I was a student, and I had an incredible experience. And my degree opened a lot of doors for me. But that's just increasing and increasing. So I think part of it comes with, you want to get the best faculty, then you need to invest in faculty. If you want the best athletic teams, you're gonna have to invest in the field houses and different places to practice. And if you want the best research, then we're gonna have to build new facilities for research. And some of that we just got to figure out. We want this to be a place where academically it can be transformational, but then because it's Hope, we've also got this, as I said at the outset, this vibrant faith community where that's the context within which most of our students live, and sort of a part of the fabric of Hope. And how do you do those two things well is something we're working on for sure.
No, I think you said it well. Like the public is kind of demanding a lot more from college than when I went. right?
That's a good way to say it.
One of the 80s, like it's not acceptable now to have certain type of dorms or to not have a certain type of student center, mental
Yes.
health support,
Yes.
academic success, career centers, like all of these things, there's a certain expectation. And then I guess it's tough if everybody else is investing in that. You're being compared to that creates the standard. And you do surveys and you find out you're losing students over these things. Like, you know what I mean? Then you say, hey, we got to invest and strengthen this, and all those things cost money.
You said it better than I said it. I mean, we should use your answer instead of mine. I mean, that's it. It's not, I don't want it to feel like it's keeping up with the Joneses, but sometimes that does feel like what it is.
So I'm still not completely sure how Hope Forward works, though.
Yeah.
Like what is there reduced tuition for the time when the student is going through? Like you talked about the cohorts. For these cohorts that went through, are they paying less and then you're hoping that they'll give back, or do they sign in a commitment to say they'll give back? I mean, how does all that work?
Yeah. So we're sort of around 30 to 40 per cohort right now, and obviously we want to grow this thing to 800 students. Mm-hmm. That's kind of our desired size. So we want this to grow a lot. But right now, those 30 or 40 students, depending on the year, would come in tuition free. They come in as Hope Forward students, and to your point, they sign a covenant that says they will give back upon graduation. Now, I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think it's 90% of those students, or it's high 90% of those students are already giving back. If you look at all 4 groups that are here, almost all of them are already starting to give as generously as you can when you're a college student. But they do sign a covenant. So they are living into the Hope Forward reality already. And hopefully that's allowing them to major in, I kind of alluded to this earlier, major in things that they feel called to do, to go be impact hope bringers into a community when they finally do graduate.
So obviously a lot of students would be interested in free tuition.
Yep.
Is that more of a merit-based program? Is it need-based? Is it need and merit? You're looking at merit, but taking need into consideration? Like how are the 30 selected, and how much of it has to do with their financial need versus them just being high flyers?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I usually will say, when people say free tuition, I usually say, well, fully funded tuition. It's been donated generously by many alums, but friends of the college before them. So it's someone's paying for it.
Sure.
We just got generous donors who are paying for that now, who are generously giving. So that'd be the first thing. And then it is. We just finished this year's kind of selection process for the incoming freshmen. We had over 700 students apply. Mm-hmm. We had 200 students interview, and we had 30 students selected. So less than 5% of students were offered a spot in the Hope Forward cohort. And to your question about, is it merit, is it need, is it high flyers? There's a 3.0 threshold. So if you have a 3.0 or better, you can apply. It's if we've admitted you and you have a 3.0, you can apply for Hope Forward. So not necessarily high flyers from an academic standpoint anyway. And then it's need blind. And so we don't take into account a family's financial situation at all in the selection process.
Well, then what are the factors that you're using to determine
Thank you
who
for
gets
asking.
it?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. So it's a two-pronged, so it's sort of a 2 gates to get to the final round. So the first one is an essay. And so that's reviewed by a large number of people, a lot of eyes on that, who are then scored from a rubric, and then the top 200 of those are brought forward for an interview process that happens from January to late February, early March. And those interviews are done by not only Hope staff and faculty, but they're also done by alums. So we would do this. We would have a virtual option for alums across the country to do that. We've got board members, our board of trustees members who participate in that as well. And then that is also scored and then runs through early March when we finally select the 30. So it's both an essay, and the essay generally is going to be something to the effect of, in what ways have you or would you like to bring hope to the world? What areas of your community do you see a need for bringing hope to the world? And once that essay, then we'll have a series of questions that we ask when students are brought to campus. Or for some, we do it virtually because we have students, of course, applying for Forward across the world, and they're not making a trip
Sure.
to Holland, Michigan.
Are you also looking at their past track record to see the extent to which they've brought hope to the world in high school? Have they been a difference maker? Is that factored in, or is it just they could have just watched, videos, played video games all the time, and just write very aspirational writing and smooth talkers, and they get in?
Yep, they could be. We don't go deep. I mean, we don't have. No one else reviews the essay, the applications. That's where we'd. The admissions application is going to be in my lane. So this is a separate application, and it wouldn't have those activities listed. So you're right. I mean, could a family or could a student pull the wool over our eyes? Potentially. I don't foresee that happening. I mean, the stories that are told, Mark, I mean, of what 17-year-olds are doing far outstrip anything I was even considering doing 25 years ago. I mean, the students that are looking at Hope College and then Hope Forward are just these kids where you're just like, we got to find a way to get you here because we want more students to be around you. We want you to grow in the soil of hope so that you go out and do the next thing. So yeah, the cynical view might be, that'd be me. I got really good at Mario Kart. So you're talking to a video game guy. But I think the stories that they're telling have such a ring of authenticity that it'd be pretty tough to fabricate.
So, Nate, I know as a liberal arts school, you have both engineering and business. There's not a lot of liberal arts colleges that have both business and engineering. What can you tell us about those programs?
Yeah, I love this question because you're right. I mean, so many liberal arts schools don't have, certainly not both. It's rare to have both of those things. And business is our largest major right now. We have more students involved in business than any other major. Now, that's not just major, minor. That could be just kids taking classes of interest in that area. But it's a huge department, and it's a really strong department. It's not just huge in that there's a lot of interest. It just has from top to bottom a lot of faculty who care about their students, and on the front end, and then such a strong and robust internship kind of placement program that I think the word of mouth has traveled very quickly over the last 5 or 10 years that this is the place to go when it comes to business because you're going to get a broad base from a liberal arts perspective, and you're going to have it. You're going to have a lot of this taught from a Christian context, and like how do you do business in that community is a real question that I think is worth wrestling with. And then for engineering, same thing. To be ABET accredited in engineering at a school of 3,200, and then also to have it be Christian liberal arts is a bit of a unicorn. So that program grew. It's been growing for a long time. Last year, it jumped 20%. So we're seeing even now, again, sort of this big increase in volume. A wonderful design lab, as I mentioned, ABET accredited. So many students come to Hope for research. So when we talk about business, we have business research certainly, but when you think of the natural applied sciences or like in engineering, we have so many research dollars coming in for students who want to do that, to work with professors in a faculty-student model to do research. I mean, Hope, I mentioned earlier, is all undergrad. And so Hope is for sure a teaching institution. Like some of these large colleges, like a state where you went, where my sister went, those are R1 schools. I mean, a lot of those professors, certainly not broad brushstrokes, but a lot of those professors love research, and that's what they do so they can, the colleges can pay the bills. Or teaching is what they do to pay the bills, rather. And at Hope, it's a part of the faculty experience. I mean, it's something that it seems like we just attract faculty who really want to be working with students side by side, presenting papers nationally, doing research for could be 1 year, could be 5 years, and having a different lab. So one of those areas would be engineering. So yeah, it's great. It's a wonderful program.
Yeah. Now the listener that I mentioned earlier, not the one that set this up, but the one that heard the announcement, she said, I have to ask you about the study abroad programs and the internships because she benefited greatly from both study abroad and internships. during her time at Hope. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, well, I hope you'll tell me who this is so I could write this.
Yeah,
person a note.
no.
I mean,
Absolutely, I will tell you. I just don't want to put her name out on the air without her permission. So.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I mentioned internships a second ago with business. Business is an area we have a ton of internships, 1,000 internships a year. Mm-hmm. We brought over 300. I want to say it's 380 business professionals to campus last year. So when we're talking about internships, that's a piece of it, but also more tactically and pragmatically, students want jobs. And so internships is a part of that, but also I think just networking is a part of that. And so national, multinational, we've got a lot of people on campus. So internships, most of those are run out of the Borchter Center for Calling and Career. And I like saying the whole name because so many, again, we go back to transactional, Mark, and so much of the college experience is getting more personalized instead of personal. It's getting more transactional instead of transformational. And the Borchter Center, I like to say calling and career because that staff is far more than a career center. That staff is ready to mentor and talk through options and to hopefully ask hard questions about what's next and why a student might be called to a certain area, a certain career, a certain profession. So the Borchter Center runs the bulk of our internship opportunities across all disciplines. It just so happens that business has a lot of students interested in internships, and so they do their own thing as well. Study abroad is something we've been doing. So I mentioned earlier, my wife is a Hope grad. I did 0 study abroad trips when I was a student, to my lasting dismay.
Yeah, that's what everybody says.
I've got some regrets. That would be one of them. My wife studied, she was a Spanish major at Hope, Spanish and religion, and she studied in the Dominican for a semester, in Mexico for a May term. I had friends in D.C., domestically, Chicago, New York. I had friends in Australia, sounded amazing to me. And so I had friends everywhere 25 years ago. We now have 300 programs in 60 countries. So wow. It's like the breadth of this thing is just massive. And we want, again, as a Christian liberal arts school, we want students to have this opportunity, like to go see what it's like, go learn some things, go experience something else, so that when you come back to Holland or somewhere else, you bring those experiences with you and hopefully a different perspective on any number of issues. So super robust programming in both those areas, internships and study abroad.
Friends, this concludes this segment of my interview with Nate Haveman, VP of Enrollment at Hope College. We hope you join us next week for the next segment.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, it's time for the second part of Kevin Newton breaking down some of the changes that are happening in international admissions. Listen and enjoy. I want you to go back to something you started saying right away when we first started talking. You talked about competitive majors. We were talking in a context mostly of St. Andrews. I think our listeners would find that interesting. What are the most competitive majors for St. Andrews, and what are the ones that you could always get in later? In effect, they had the UCAS deadline, but then they still had space, and they effectively went to rolling admissions through the spring and maybe even early summer. What are those most competitive, least competitive, and do you find it's consistent from school to school, or were you just strictly talking St. Andrews and it would have been completely different if it was another school?
I think that they do switch up as to what's competitive and what's not competitive. By far, the most competitive fields at St. Andrews are going to be international relations and management. Those are phenomenally difficult fields to get into. I mean, they still have very attractive acceptance rates for Americans, but it is admittedly, St. Andrews aims to have the best undergraduate experience in international relations in Europe. And, they do a pretty darn good job of it, to be quite honest with you. With management, very similar. They really are zeroed in on that. I think, when you step away from it, what you'll find are certain fields that, if we're going to speak broadly from university to university, it tends to mirror a little bit what we see here in the U.S.
I wondered about that.
Computer science is going to be competitive wherever. That said,
So I don't know if you're seeing this, but finally the tide is starting to shift there, and schools are experiencing less comp sci applicants than they had in the past. And comp sci apps are down actually, first year in a while, but noticeably in quite a few instances. I think it partly has to do with, for one, there's a lot of talk about this, and we're going to do a segment on this at some point. Like jobs in comp sci actually have gotten hard to come by.
Right.
And so when word spreads, it's really, really hard to get into a program. And, there might be oversaturation in the marketplace. That starts to filter into the public consciousness, and then it starts to shift the demand patterns.
I was actually speaking with someone yesterday, and they brought up that they were interested in computer science for the longest. But now that things are shifting, they're looking a little bit more, they ended up focusing a little bit more on law, which, not to beat one of my favorite drums about the UK in particular, but overseas in general, law and medicine are typically undergrad fields. So, medicine is always going to be the most competitive subject at a university. And in fact, it's very rare that I see a student from the United States who I'm like, okay, you've got a solid shot at this. You'd have to have 5s on your APs and everything else. But undergraduate studies in law, we've placed students as late as August for a end of September start date. So
wow,
it's at a top 15 law school in the UK. So again, it's not always what you would think. Computer science, international relations tends to be, especially during, shall we say, spicy times on the global stage. I know,
I like that term.
I know.
I'm gonna have to start using that term, spicy.
Two of my best friends, actually, the irony is all of my best friends, really. One of them was a Persian linguist in the military. The other has his master's degree in Arabic studies. And,
man, you really are a wonk.
Like,
those are your best friends.
Another one of us went to Johns Hopkins SAIS, and the fourth is high up at DHS, and it's just, the guys' group chat on international relations is lit right now. As the kids would say, it is lit. Our wives are so bored of us, it's not even funny.
Funny. Any other new developments? Anything else our listeners should know, changes or things to be aware of on the international scene?
I think, and again, this was something I was looking really forward to talking to until I got that email from St. Andrews this morning. We're also seeing that more and more international universities are moving away from the AP as a gold standard. So we had the big news this year, and I confirmed it a few weeks ago with the new director of North American admissions for King's College London, that if your high school does not offer APs, you do not have to jump through any special hoops. They will consider your grades as is. So
it's interesting, because in some ways I feel AP is having more significance in some ways. It isn't in the U.S. So it isn't in the sense that more and more and more schools are moving away from AP exams. So the more schools, and I'm talking mostly about highly selective privates, but in some cases publics as well. So the more people move away from it, from sort of what would be deemed as great feeder schools, the more schools adjust to that, and it's not so atypical, and they get comfortable as a reader with that setup. So that certainly is happening. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this week about a school that never really read files very well other than through the AP Prism, and I've seen improvement in how they read files now, from people that high schools that aren't offering the AP curriculum. But, and I've got an interview that I'm actually doing in 4 days on this topic, so listeners will hear a lot about it. But, I've had a lot of conversations on the podcast that have been very pro-test optional or pro-no-harm policies. And I've had someone for a while who's much more of a bigger advocate of testing, and he's wanted to come on the podcast for probably a year and a half. And we've had some sessions and some conversations, and I wasn't really ready for him, but he reached out to me again, asked again, and I am ready for him now. Partly because I do want listeners to hear the other arguments. And we'll agree on some things and we'll disagree, and I also think that will probably make for some good, interesting audio. But one thing that he is right to point out, and I have noticed it, is without test scores for highly selective schools, AP scores have more significance than they previously did in many instances. I asked Christoph Gutentag from Duke this in my interview with him, but I kind of knew the answer before I even asked him. And the question I asked him was, do AP scores take on more significant when you don't if someone's a test optional applicant? I knew he would be honest, and he was. He said, he basically said, yes, we like to see some standard benchmark in the file. So it's weird. So I know that, David Blowbaum's the guy I'm having on. I know he's going to want to talk about that because we've already had been going over our content before. And he's going to really want to point out to listeners the increased role AP scores are taking in some schools, even changing some of their policies related to that. Now, the problem when we talk this way is if you look at the 275 U.S. schools, 4-year bachelor granting, not-for-profits, we're talking about a very small slice of them. And when you talk this way, unless you're very lucid in your communication, it can come across, oh my goodness, this is new for me. Everything's changed. And the reality, and I fully expect that even more so now with the problems that the colleges are having for funding. There's just not that many schools that can afford to swim upstream and buck the national trends, go against what the population wants, and not see, application diminishment. And it's pretty rare for application diminishment to be acceptable. It's funny, I'm tracking schools like Brown and Yale that experience some pretty significant slippage in applications. Be interesting to see if that continues with them, whether or not we see adjustments in policies. It reminds me of the SAT, ACT, like those two watch each other like a hawk, right? As soon as one moves ahead in market share and stays ahead for a few years, it's normally time for the other one to come out and roll out a whole new revised version of
right.
What they opt. Like it's just basic survival instincts. Like if the market is telling me they don't like my product, don't get me wrong, the Browns and Yales are in no danger of the market telling them they don't like. But it'll be interesting if they, maybe it's just 1-year data. We'll see. But I don't think there's any question it's correlated to them going back to required testing.
Oh,
yeah.
Again,
sorry to sort of incorporate so much U.S. stuff in an international conversation.
You're good. And, again, it's something that I'm really happy to see. Now, with regards to the SAT and ACT, a lot of places are still requiring them, but they're very upfront about what their minimums are. And in a lot of cases, these are, I'm loath to use the word achievable or easy because, I like to say you don't judge a fish's intelligence by its ability to climb a tree. And, but they're using them as a replacement for other things. And even those in instances can be, subbed out. So, but again, it's where the universities in the UK that are still requiring either IB or AP scores, it's the same usual suspects: Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, Imperial, and UCL. But we're working on UCL and Imperial. We'll see how they go, but we're working on them.
Interesting. And you're talking about for those are the ones you've seen less requirements on APs.
Those are the ones.
But what about SAT, ACT?
Those 5 are the ones that still are requiring APs. With ACT, okay. SAT, it's we're definitely seeing, shall we say, a broadening. So if a student's done well in dual enrollment courses, and I've got students right now who he's finished his associate's degree. They don't need to see an ACT or SAT. They can clearly see that this student can do university level work at a high level. They see the GPA, and again, it's something that I think that I think it's really kind of ironic that in a lot of instances, these overseas universities put more stock in American community colleges than we do because they're great places. I know if I can plug the work a friend of mine is doing, James Cook University in Australia, their American rep is working around the clock to build formal agreements that if you get your associate's degree, you can transfer right into James Cook.
Wow,
and
smart.
I know, I believe you're talking to her soon, actually. She's doing some really cool work with that. And I think that more and more these universities overseas are recognizing the quality of, dual enrollment and things like that. So that's a possible route if you're looking to avoid the ACT or SAT as well.
Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to share some things I learned on my Texas trip I think you're going to find very interesting. I'm also going to tell you about a question I got from two parents from New Jersey 3 days ago in the counseling room. And the parents asked me, I was doing a family session with the parents and their student, what is it that we can do as parents to help our student? Absolutely loved that question. I'm going to share with you what my answer was to this question. Then we'll have part 2 of my interview with John Pollard, Dean of Admissions at Frankie Honors College at the University of Arizona. And we'll be discussing what makes the University of Arizona distinct and special. This is part 2 of 2. And friends, I close you out with my favorite quote from Frank Bruni's excellent book, Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be. I feel like a real kindred soul with Bruni with this book, and I absolutely love the title of the book, by the way. So I've mentioned a few times I picked my 10 favorite admissions quotes and I put them at the start of my book. This one's actually number 1. For too many parents and their children, getting into a highly selective school isn't just another challenge, just another goal. A yes or no from Amherst or Dartmouth or Duke or Northwestern is seen as the conclusive measure of a young person's worth, a binding verdict on the life that he or she has led up until that point, an incontestable harbinger of the successes or disappointments to come. Winner or loser, this is when the judgment is made. This is the great, brutal culling. What madness and what nonsense. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Escobar in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.